this month's edition of WEP Development Series. This month's development series is going to focus on the outcome of COP27, the implication for vulnerable regions and populations. And we have amazing speakers who are going to do justice to this topic. We have Gertrude Keyangi, the Executive Director, Support for Women in Agriculture and Environment, SWAGEN. We have Bridget Okon. She is the Executive Director, Kebet Women Development and Resource Center. We have Dr. Priscilla Achakwa, the Global Lead and Founder of Women Environmental Program. We have Marlene Achoki, Global Policy Co-Lead, Climate Justice Care Climate Justice Center. We have Olumide Idowu, Executive Director, African Youth Initiative on Climate Change. And myself, who will be moderating this event for today, I am Mr. John Baki, the Deputy Executive Director of Women Environmental Program. So before we begin to introduce our speakers to take us through the outcome of COP27 and what implications these outcomes hold for vulnerable regions and populations, permit me to call on the Global Lead and Founder of Women Environmental Program, Dr. Priscilla Achakwa, to say a word of welcome.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending where you're coming from. First and foremost, let me welcome you to 1st December, the last month of the year, which we thank God most of us have entered this successfully. And by the grace of God, we shall end the year successfully. We went to COP. Before we went to COP, we had a series of meetings. We had a series of these webinars. Good morning. We were able to articulate the issues that we wanted to present at the COP27. And of course, most of you were part of you. Some of you joined us online. Some of you joined us physically while we were in COP. We thank God for the success of some of those things. One of the issues was the issues of loss and damage, which we were advocating to have a kind of a fund, a trust fund for it. And to the glory of God, we were able to achieve that. So we must clap for ourselves for the tremendous work that we did, not just with ourselves, but with the global civil society that joined us, especially the African group. Civil society who we felt that this is an important issue, and the civil society in general from the global south, but also from the global north that joined us to advocate for this trust fund, which we were very happy. Although we could not reach agreement on so many other issues, especially on the one like gender where I negotiated, we discovered that the language for it was completely watered down. But of course, I mean, we got something that we could take home and we continue to negotiate. And we're hoping that by the time we go to Bonn next year in June, that is one of the agenda items that we undertake. So by and large, I want to welcome you to this series, but also to say that let us continue to engage. Going to COP and coming back is not enough. This is the time for us to start preparing. This is the time for us to start engaging more actively on the issues that we have agreed to have. What is the implementation strategy? We need to hold our leaders accountable. Most of us went there and they signed up to this document. So how are they going to implement it? It is the time for us as civil society organizations to make sure that we begin to monitor and evaluate it. But also noting that as the test sector of government, we will try as much as possible to fill that gap, which we feel that the government is not doing well. So we still have a lot of work on our hands. And it will only get better when all of us are involved at this point in time. So once again, thank you very much for joining. And I encourage each and every one of us to listen attentively. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. And if you want to join on any of this conversation going forward, please feel free to also reach out to us. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you very much, Ma, for those words of welcome and for the background that you have painted. We are still waiting for some of our speakers to join, but before they join and I start giving the floor to them, let me quickly paint a little background and to the COP27 that just happened, in addition to what Dr. Priscilla had said. So for those who were following the COP, I'm sure many of us who are on this call were at COP27 or were following it virtually from a distance. But there were several issues that were on the agenda for discussion at COP27. And some of the major items that were up for discussions were loss and damage. There was a loss and damage discussion on the agenda. There was an issue of a mitigation work program, issue of finance, issue of Article 6 and carbon market, issue of a global goal for adaptation, issue of agriculture, issue of gender, issue of action for climate empowerment, among other issues that were discussed at COP27. And these discussions produce outcomes, and it is those outcomes that we want to highlight here and analyze how we affect the vulnerable populations and regions, especially vulnerable regions like Africa, like Asia, like Latin America, Middle East, and the Caribbean. So these were some of the issues, among other issues that were discussed at COP27, which our speakers will be taking a look at. The first person I will call, I don't know if he has joined in yet, is the Executive Director of African Youth Initiative on Climate Change, Olumide Idowu. I don't know if Olumide Idowu is here yet. If you are here, you can unmute yourself and take the floor. Okay, it seems Olumide Idowu is not here yet. He just joined here. Okay. Olumide, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry, good morning.
Okay, thank you very much for joining these discussions. Olumide is the Executive Director of African Youth Initiative on climate change, and he was at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and he will be giving us highlight of what happened at Egypt in relation to some of the issues that he monitored. One of which will be on the issue of action for climate empowerment, the issues of youth and children. So Olumide will give us highlight of what the outcome of that discussion was, and what's the implication of that on vulnerable populations and regions, especially like ours, Africa. So Olumide, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. John, and sorry for joining late. For me, I think it has been a long journey for us. After spending more than 3 weeks, I say 3 weeks because I traveled a week before for the youth negotiators training. And now that I'm back home, I thought that one of the biggest thing that could have reached an agreement on the gradual phase out of all fossil fuels, but what we just see is not that. That's my own big highlight, that we did not see much on the fossil fuel side, banning fossil fuel and making those countries make commitments towards that. But in other words, I can say for Africa, we've been able to, or let me say developing country, we've been able to come up with, get a good signal when it comes to the issue of loss and damage, that there's a financial mechanism for her. But I would say that notwithstanding, does COP27 really, do we really achieve COP27 based on the vulnerable people or based on the people living at the receiving end? I would say that with this experience in COP, it is not really a good outcome when it comes to supporting the vulnerable people. And I will want to highlight some on adaptation. I think it's very, very key that we know that we need to acknowledge the unique requirements and the situation for Africa. Looking at the financial standpoint of view, it's very, very important that we mention Africa in they mention Africa in the financial section of the, and it covered the decision of both COP27 and the CME. So in supporting the vulnerable people, I think this translates a very good signal for us during the negotiation that on adaptation, we need to start looking at the issue of how do we make sure that those financial mechanisms get straight to the grassroots. On the issue of energy and just transition, we all know that like a country like Nigeria, we've been calling for a just transition. We've been looking at our energy transition, our ETP plan. And the only thing I think is the pathway for the simple transition in COP were decided separately by the parties. And though they've talked about it, an indication have shown to us that just transition cannot stand alone without energy transition. And that is why it's a very broad and big conversation for us to also see. So how do we now start framing our climate action as the just transition to lower emission future through the varieties of pathways that determine the global, local, and actions that we are talking about as a country. So during COP, on the issue of energy and just transition, I think it's very, very important that the decision made was clear and the approach that they take into account factor the relationship between energy, society, and workforce. And if you look at, for most of us that understand the climate action, that understand the climate conversation, Article 29 also make a very good point on that. And it's very important for us to look at that. Then let me look into another area, which is mitigation. I think on mitigation issue, we understand that as an African continent, the conversation is not that very, very strong. And the main objective of UNFCCC negotiation have remained to be cutting non-carbon emission like methane and exploring solutions to global warming that are based on nature. But when you look at nature in the sense of, I look at mitigation in the sense of Africa, this has put pressure on poor nations and the pillars of their economy, like Nigeria, because energy poverty is one of the biggest problems that we also see. And likewise as agriculture, which will probably grow as a non-carbon emission that attracts more attention. So on mitigation, we still have a long way to go, most especially for the vulnerable people, which we are talking about, and how it's going to reflect the action we have. Then one of the major big highlights as well is on the loss and damage, which we know that the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation has actually helped us to reach a significant milestones with the operationalization of the Santiago network. But the bottom line now is that we need to look at how can we solve that problem of the financial mechanism they are talking about. So in order to provide timely technical assistance, they said, to African countries in need, then we need to have a clear criteria for network membership so that all the countries that are facing this issue of loss and damage will be able to see how the establishment of an additional opportunity for them to understand that it is not only the technical assistance we are looking at, but what are the criteria we need to put in place in account so that the financial support will reach the grassroots and the vulnerable people. So for me, I think it's a very big conversation that we need to talk about. And let me also mention on the negotiation track of climate finance. And we all know every COP, for like 3 COPs back now, we've been talking about climate finance. How do we get finance for adaptation, finance for this? It's a big conversation. And I would say that once more, the covered decision of both the COP27 and CMA makes significant mention of Africa. They keep talking about Africa when it comes to the financial mechanism and the response to the continent, particularly financial requirements. So what are the financial requirements and the condition that this money is meant for? It's a big conversation that we need to talk about as well. We must be careful, like a lot of negotiators through the African group of negotiators, that we must be careful to assess how this law of supply and demand will actually affect carbon pricing, as all these projects that we are putting in front are transferred from the CDM to the new mechanism under the Article 6. And so it's very important that we understand, and we must be very careful about the kind of financing we are looking at. We should be looking at finances that support the local community, the vulnerable people, not in loan that we keep, piling up debts that is not going to make. Lastly, let me also talk about my experience on the capacity building, which I think is majorly for young people. The young people actually also need to speak more on the issue of capacity building, because without building a capacity in driving innovation, driving community engagement, most of us will not be able to really, dive into this conversation. And linking the capacity building to technology, where we have the technology mechanism committee that was announced during, committee that have been working on this issue of capacity building. And the technique is there's a challenge in lack of funding, lack of opportunities for all those capacity building. So for me, I think we need to start looking at how we can drive more young people to understand what climate change is all about, how to approach climate conversation, and how to speak on that end. So let me end on that, and I look forward to more deliberation and how we can continue to drive more sustainable environment for young people and for the vulnerable people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olumide. Those who have just joined us, Olumide is the Executive Director of African Youth Initiative on Climate Change, and he went to COP27 as one of the junior negotiators for Nigeria. Thank you once again, Olumide. You have spoken about a number of issues, from loss and damage to energy and just transition, to mitigation, to climate finance, capacity building, technology, and the Santiago network. I'm sure some people may be wondering, people who are not conversant with the climate change negotiations, they may be wondering what all these are all about. Maybe let me quickly try to summarize so that you can be on the same page with every other person before we proceed. Olumide talked about the loss and damage facility that was delivered at COP27, which is one of the outcomes of COP27. The loss and damage facilities, or the loss and damage fund, is a fund or a financial mechanism that will pay compensation or address the impact of climate change of vulnerable countries, vulnerable populations, those impacts of climate change that are irreversible, that you cannot address with adaptation fund and other kinds of fund that you already have under the UNFCCC. And that is the fund that most African countries or other vulnerable countries were clamoring for, that we have adaptation fund, we have mitigation fund. All these funds that we have, they do not address losses and damages that result from the impacts of climate change. And that advocacy has been on for over a decade. It was at COP27 that funding mechanism was delivered. So let me quickly mute this where this noise is coming from. So Olumide also talked about the issue of mitigation, how the effort to get countries to commit to reducing emissions from fossil fuel it did not come out well at COP27. And you know, the root cause of climate change is from the emissions that we make, emissions from fossil fuels. So if this issue was not well addressed, it means that the goal of the Paris Agreement to limit temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius will be defeated by 2030. He spoke about so many other things, but I will not bore us with that, as we have many experts in the house to also shed light on those other issues. So while we wait on other speakers to join, Dr. Priscilla Achakba also was at COP27 and was one of the negotiators for Nigeria on gender. So let's get Dr. Priscilla to let us know how the negotiations on gender went, since we know that climate change impacts affect more women and vulnerable groups. So how was the negotiations? How did the negotiations try to address the impact of climate change on these vulnerable populations?
Thank you, John. Unfortunately, during the COP, during the negotiations, we are not able to make headway in terms of negotiations. Like I said in my opening remarks, we had nights of negotiations. Sometimes we stayed there up to 1 a.m. Trying to negotiate just a text. We were able to agree on all things, but let me just give you a background. In June this year, we were in Bonn during the SBR. The SBR is a technical session where all the technical people, the technical experts meet to articulate issues that will now be negotiated during the COP. So in Bonn, we were able to, we had 2 full weeks. Unfortunately, we could still not be able to agree on the text that would be taken to COP27. We had 2 drafts, which was nothing like, I mean, it was not even a draft. It was like just notes, for us, notes that were taken during the meeting. And so we took all these notes and we went to COP. And when we got to COP, we were hoping that at least at the end of the day, we would be able to get a language specifically on finance. Unfortunately for us, despite the negotiations of night and day, because we were looking specifically, as Olumide has said, the issues of finance, because if we agree on everything and we are not getting finance, not in terms of loans, because we're tired of loans, because we don't want a situation whereby they will make our countries, especially African countries, will continue to borrow, and at the end of the day, there's so much debt on us. But we are looking at the issues of climate finance for the implementation of that, because this is actually the review year. And in terms of the review year, we're supposed to take stock of what is happening and plan, but also look at what can we do as countries. Now, as part of the GAP, it was agreed that we should have national gender focal points. And this national gender focal points are supposed to interact with all the other ministries, government agencies, civil society, and the rest of them to articulate the issues that have to do with gender and vulnerable groups. Now, but without a mandate or a financing mechanism, how are these national gender focal points expected to carry out their activities? So it has been unclear or what the mandate of the national gender focal point is all about. And this is one of the things that we were negotiating during COP. But also specifically, there are several activities that have been outlined for us to implement. And these activities, without funding mechanisms, you cannot implement anything. And so we were looking at the language. If you look at Article 9, Section 4.7 of the Paris Agreement, it talks specifically about developed countries making sure that they make resources available, including finance, for the developing countries to implement the GAP, the Gender Action Plan. Unfortunately, at this meeting, it became a very serious issue as the parties were not really interested. I mean, especially the developed countries, because that is the language that they refuse. Paragraph 12, particularly when we're negotiating, which talks about developed countries to support developing countries with finances. Most of them refuse, especially US, even though EU at some point agreed with us. But the G77 and China, which Africa is part of it, were stuck because the US said that they will not take the language on developing countries, that it should be all countries. So when you talk about all countries, so what was the need? Why did we agree on that? So this was a huge challenge. And we kept negotiating and negotiating and negotiating. At the end of the day, in fact, some of us on the last minute were not able to reach a consensus, so we had to leave. And it was when we left, because the COP27 presidency was desirous of making sure that they get an action point on gender or a reach agreement, especially in their cover letter. It was a difficult task, and it was when everyone left, that was when they decided to now get the language and put it in there as part of the cover letter, which is completely watered down when it comes to the issues of gender. So for me, I would say that we just went there as part of the system to say that yes, we are there, because at the end of the day, we were not able to negotiate anything substantially, especially when it comes to the issues of finance on gender and climate change. So that can work. Thank you. Over to you, John.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma, for that highlight of what happened in the gender negotiations. Let me pause at this point to open up the floor for people who want to make contributions or ask questions. So you can use the raise hand feature so that I'll see who wants to make a contribution or to ask a question. Okay, I can see one hand up from Emmanuel.
Hello, good morning, sir.
Good morning. You can go ahead with your question or contribution.
Okay, mine is a question. I would love to appreciate the two speakers on the report they've given based on what happened at COP27. My question is about the kind of funds that are available, like the energy, maybe technology mechanism fund, whether there is adaptation fund. So I was wondering whether there is anything like capacity building funds, because some of us are interested in research, trying to mitigate the effect of climate change. For one, I I'm intending on taking up research on converting biomass into fuel so that gradually we could phase off our fossil fuels. The challenge we have is funding. So I'm wondering whether there is any fund that has been set aside so that we can have access to such funds so that we'll be able to fund our research. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So either of the speakers can take the floor to answer this. Okay, maybe before the speakers come on to also add, let me say that we have funding mechanisms under the UNFCCC that can address the issues you have talked about, the issue of capacity, the issue of technology. And this funding could be under the Adaptation Fund, it could be under the Green Climate Fund, it could be under the Global Environment Facility, or other funding mechanisms that exist under the UNFCCC. So under any of these funds, you could you could see where the issue of capacity building could be addressed, or where the issue of technology could be addressed. But you need to look up the funds to see the criteria that you have to meet before you can access the fund either as a government institution, or as a private institution, or as a civil society organization. So you have to check it up to see the criteria and if it suits what you want the fund to be used for. I can see another hand up from Damaris.
Hello, John. Good morning, everyone. So, mine is not a question, but I just want to comment the African Feminist Group and the WEP delegation for different actions at COP that brought a lot of attraction. And I also feel that those actions were so powerful that they might have also influenced the decisions on the loss and damage, because it was one of the first actions that we had outside that got the media attention. So in as much as we're not getting adequate funding for climate change mitigation, the little resources that we have, we're actually making use of it. So I just want to comment on that and also encourage us to do more. And we also had different opportunities to strengthen our capacities in different ways. So for me, it was actually a good outcome in terms of participation and capacity development, basically. And of course, we had opportunity to network and relate with other partners from different countries, and we're still reaching out to them even after COP to see how we can collaborate and partner better. Thank you.
Thank you, Damaris, for that. And so you can also put your question in the chat box so that we can take it from there, or you can put up your hand and I will recognize and ask you to make your contribution or to ask your question. So anyone from the audience can contribute on the outcome of COP27. I can see many of us who were at COP27 among participants, and it will be interesting to get your own view on what came out of COP27 that you want to share with the participants. There is a hand up from Babatunde Quadri. Babatunde, you can take the floor.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I want to appreciate our speaker for their insightful session with us. Indeed, we really learned from them. My question goes those, on capacity building, I want to talk on the role of the youth. What is the main role of the youth in taking up for responsibility to push for climate change? For example, now, where I came from, there is a lot of no information regarding climate change. Even majority of the youth here, they are not conversant with climate change specifically. People are not encouraged. There is no hub where someone can go and volunteer with. Some of those volunteering that are related to climate change were online, they were virtual. But you know, the issue of climate change now require physical commitment. Aside being volunteering online, what's the possible solution to that, especially from area where people are not aware about the climate change? Because I've had a similar cases like that. Even many of my friends, my colleagues, they are not interested in taking up as well for climate change. So my question is that how can youth participate in the process? How can you take up responsibility to
Voice up, please, voice up, please.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. I think there's a hacker in the room.
Hello?
Yes, okay, you can go ahead.
Yes, I've a question, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I think this question should be answered by Olumide Ito, the Executive Director of African Youth Initiative on Climate Change. I think Olumide is still here. Hello, Olumide, are you here?
He just joined back. Just check.
Hello, Olumide.
Olumide just joined, so you can.
Yeah, Olumide, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. There was a question here that was directed to you, and the question was that how can youth participate in the climate change, in implementing climate change actions? How will youth be encouraged to have volunteer opportunities so that they can contribute their quota in the implementation of climate change actions? That's the summary of the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. John. I hope you can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so that question is a very, everyday conversation. But what I would just say is that, my mentor always tell me that money will never be enough. And that's how volunteering will continue, no matter where you find yourself. So for me, for you, or for anybody to engage in climate action, majorly for young people, number one, you need to get to understand the kind of skills that you have, because the space is very big and majority of young people are creating different innovations. You can be a tech person and you can be, support the environment space. You can be a graphics person. You just have to have the skills to, be part of this journey, because not everybody wants to dirty their hand in the community. Some people have a technical experience. So you need to find your own space in the environment space. Now that there's tech, and a lot of people are talking about how they can use tech to promote environment, how they can use tech to bring innovations out. So in as much as you have a skill and you can, you understand the space very well. And most importantly, we also need to understand that learning is key. When I say learning is, we need to read about. I remember when Dr. Priscilla was speaking, she was talking about article. I also mentioned some article. A lot of us have to go and read all these articles to understand how all these things are all about. So we need to read, we need to understand the space, we need to understand the conversation, we need to know what is actually going on for you to strive, or for you to enjoy what is actually happening in the space. And for some other people that also, if you're an outspoken person, you also need to understand that information is key. You need to get your information right. You need to know how to, but if you are looking for organization to join, there are a lot of network organization across Africa, anywhere you're speaking from, even in Nigeria here. And the network I'm representing is African Youth Initiative on Climate Change. It's a loose network where you can find your space and make sure that you make yourself relevant. Nobody will give you the platform. You need to take ownership of it so that you build yourself, and you also get a sort of opportunity along the way. So the more you engage yourself, the more you see how the space looks like. So you can be in the area of climate agriculture, you can be in the area of energy, in different areas you find yourself. It's very important that we understand the space and you give your time for volunteerism, which is very, very key. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you so much, Olumide, for that answer. I hope that the answer was clear enough to you, Babatunde Quadri. But let's move on to take another contribution, or it's a question from Dr. Helen Tete, after which we will take from Chiemela Anosike. So Dr. Helen, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, John. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for Olumide and Dr. Priscilla for yet sensitizing us the more, or recapturing all that happened in at the COP. This will be my second COP, but it was more meaningful than the first. The first was more like dropped in the middle of an ocean. We didn't know whether to swim forward or backward, sideward, to the right or to the left. A bunch of confusion for me. The space was something else. But this second COP was quite enlightening. Capacity strengthening, if I would say. And thanks to the side events that was put together by WEP, a deliberate one to strengthen capacity was huge, where a lot of things were unraveled when it comes to climate change and when it came to UNFCCC. So mine is actually just to comment all that happened and to see that you never would know what this collaboration, what this partnership is doing. The impact of COP27 is resulting to calling my board members for a meeting, sharing what had happened, and probably looking at the organizational work plan again. Because you would notice that it's not so much about doing everything. It's about having targeted intervention. Intervention that may take a while, but you could see impact in the society. So it was quite an unveiling of the real development work for me. bumping into knowing that like environment is the mother of them all, because you found that everything was linked up to environment. Is it about climate change and health? Is it about climate mobility? Is it about climate change and education? Is it about climate agriculture? Is it about capacity building? Is it about climate finance? So you could see that every rope was linked up to climate change, which is the mother of all, or environment, which is the mother of all intervention, if you ask me to recouch. So that's just to share from the wealth, just a bucket from the well of my experience in this last COP. Of course, went in as observers to learn. It's still a learning process. It's still a process to unlearn and relearn so that we are mentored correctly. And I felt I should bring that up. And it was also mind-blowing to see that Africa hosting the COP was an opportunity for them to spill it out, for them to insist, for them to place their demands. That stood out for me. The coalition of African women and feminist groups around Africa coming together, over 100 or so organizations with one voice, was a synergy that I think went down during the COP27. And it was something that should not be flung away, something that can be improved on, where the women and girls' demand were correlated and presented, Africa having one voice. It's something that I think should be commended. And then seeing that for once, I mean, for the first time on the COP agenda, the issues of losses and damages standing up on the soil of Africa was also, for me at the COP, something that stood up, that should be applauded for. Whether the grammar and they didn't come to clear agreement as we've been told by the negotiators, a seed was sown. And we're hoping that moving forward, these are things that we could build on and make sure that our losses and damages facility is activated. And the people at the grassroots that have been hugely impacted by climate change as a result of the developed world activities, they too will be compensated also in their lifetime. So I could go on and on, but COP27 stood out to me, and I felt it was nice to also bring this out to an open. Like Olumide said, it's just a chance to read more. These are personal commitments, and be committed to this cause much more than before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Helen, for sharing your insight from COP27. I'm going to move on now and take a few contributions or questions, because I'm looking at the time and we've gone past 12 noon already. I will try to end this call by maybe at most 15 minutes after 12 noon, because we have another call to join, the call from the African Feminist Task Force, the task force that yeah, so this call we end by 12:15. But let me have Chair Mela Anosike for 2 minutes or less.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can I be heard?
Yes, you are loud and clear.
Okay. All right. So good afternoon.
Okay. Thank you.
My name is Chamela Anosike. I'm a startup founder in the eastern part of Nigeria, Abia State. So this is a question, and I think it's directed to Mr. Olumide Idowu. So I was present at COP27 this year and joined lots of side events, both at the Nigerian Pavilion and then other organizations. So one of the side events that actually stood out for me was a conversation around just transition, especially when it has to do with energy transition. I think Mr. Olumide mentioned that during his presentation this morning. Now, one of the things about making a just transition is one that is centered around the people. So I think it was at the Irene Pavilion, we had a conversation around just transition, and one of the panelists said it has to be centered around the people. You can't force them to accept something that they don't even know anything about or they don't care about. So it has to be centered around them. It has to be people-centric and all of that. And then I also know that questions rose up as a result of that. And especially for me that works in rural communities. So I run a startup, Solaris. We design solar booths, solar kiosks, and we deploy them to rural communities, especially in the eastern part of Nigeria, the Niger Delta regions that are disconnected, communities that are disconnected from electricity, from the grid. So most times when you enter into such communities, you find out that most of them has a lot of bias around climate issue, climate change, even adopting solar energy and all of that. A lot of bias, a lot of myths around them. So we have to go heavy on sensitization because we want to make a just transition and we want it to be centered around them. We don't want a situation where we would force these things on them. So my question to Mr. Olumide is: are there institutions, are there organizations, especially in Nigeria, that are set up to sensitize in order to make this just transition a feasible one, to sensitize especially those in rural communities that are mostly biased? They don't even understand what you're talking about when you mention climate change and all of that. They have this natural bias, they don't understand it. That I think I've encountered a lot of myths around solar energy. They'll tell you it's not an efficient type of energy system. It doesn't charge mobile devices. We have to go heavy on sensitization. We have to give out solar kits and all of that in order to convince them. So are there other organizations, are there support for such organizations? Are there also organizations, associations that are heavy on carrying out sensitization, especially for those in rural areas, in order for us to achieve this just transition plan?
Thank you for your question, Olumide. If you can hear me, you can take on the answer right away.
Mr. John, was that a question or was it a contribution? But let me just touch base on. For me, you've said a lot of things that is very key and important. And the issue of just transition, like I said, we need to understand the pathways for a simple transition and how we are going to decide to make the community actually understand just transition. And just transition is not just something we are doing just like doing now. Just transition is something that takes time. And to transit alone, you need to put a lot of people in mind. And for you that works with local community, for me, the issue of solar is interesting, but how many people actually understand what that contribution is and in achieving our just transition and energy transition? But I would say that the only thing I can say here is that communicating climate change to communities takes a lot of patience and takes a lot of understanding, because for us that do advocacy campaign, we need to understand that languages are very key in disseminating those information. So I would say that if you can try as much as possible, try to read the Article 29. It's going to give you more understanding of what the environment, on the issue of just transition and energy transition looks like. And when we look at our ETP as well, Nigeria, they've given us a policy, a document that give us a pathway to how they want to achieve our just transition. And the only thing I can say to us as an community dwellers or community mobilizers is that we need to take this document, read, digest, and use it as an implementation for our own communities so that we can complement the efforts of the government in achieving the energy transition. Because the government cannot do it alone. We just need to also do our best to continue. Then we continue to seek up for enabling environment to achieve energy transition. So that is my own point on that. But I don't know if I'm able to address your question. But I thought you were making a comment and sharing information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olumide. Yeah, I think somehow you have addressed the question. I'm not speaking for her though, but I'm sure she would have gotten the answer she needed. But maybe in addition to that, there are several organizations that are doing sensitization, not just around just transition, but on climate change and other environmental issues. Yours is one of them. You are already doing fantastic job on the ground of sensitizing communities. Government agencies are there. Now the coordinating agency for climate change issues is the Federal Ministry of Environment. And then you have other sister agencies that are doing same, and several other civil society organizations. But as Olumide said, patience is key. Patience is one key word to watch, because to transit from one way of doing things to another is not something that you expect it to happen automatically. So there should be that patience with communities for them to be able to adjust. That is why even the federal government of Nigeria has launched the energy transition plan. That is another phase of just transition, how the country wants to transition from, move away gradually from fossil fuel and embrace cleaner energy sources. So I think that's that to your question. Okay, I do not see any other hand up, and we are close to the time that I pegged our meeting to stop. So just to do a little recap of the discussion so far. We had a lineup of speakers, but unfortunately, most of them were caught up in other activities. Some were traveling, some were sick. I don't know what happened, but this is the first time that we're having so many speakers miss out as a result of the challenges they face few hours before the event. We apologize for that, but I'm sure that what the two speakers and other contributors have been able to put forward have given us an insight into what happened at COP27. Can you hear me now? Okay, so in summary, the speakers told us what came out of COP27, and the biggest of them, which was anticipated by Africa, was the loss and damage fund that was put in place. So after several decades of negotiations, this fund was agreed by the parties and has been put in place, and a transition committee was given the terms of reference to work on the modalities to operationalize this fund. So the report of this committee will be presented by next COP28, which will happen in United Arab Emirates. So we have the funding now, but we await the operational modalities of this fund before we can begin to reap its benefit. And the speakers also talked about the issue of mitigation, how parties did not commit very well to phase out or to reduce emissions, did not commit to their did not commit to. Sorry, give me a moment. Yeah. So how parties did not give enough commitment to sit down or to reducing emission, which many analysts say was the essence of having a loss and damage facility, while the real cause of climate change was treated with kid gloves. That even with this loss and damage facility, if emissions continue, as many parties did not commit seriously to it, are we not still going to have several losses and damages that will arise from the impact of climate change? So that was the worry of many people, but thank God we have this facility, and let's see how it goes. And going forward, let's see the commitment that will come from developed country parties to reducing emission. And the issue of climate finance, which developed countries committed to contributing to the climate fund $100 billion US per year until 2020. That fund, those commitments have not yet been realized. And that was another worry at COP27, that up to this moment, these commitments have not been realized. And given the estimates that have been made on what Africa alone requires to address its climate challenge, what we have in the climate fund now cannot even address it. So addressing climate change also requires this funding to come from the developed countries that were responsible for climate change to be able to address this issue of climate change. That also was on a downside. In summary, the major outcome that interested especially African countries was the loss and damage facility that was put in place. Other agenda items, the outcome on them were not so pleasant to especially vulnerable regions and populations like Africa, as the speakers have highlighted already. So this is what came out of COP27. We can read this up more on our own to know how these outcomes can or will affect our work in vulnerable regions of the world like Africa. So I want to take out this time to appreciate our speakers and those who spoke and those who could not because of one challenge or another. We appreciate you for accepting to speak in the first place before the challenge that you encountered. And to all the participants, we appreciate your time for staying on from the beginning to the end of this call. We shall call on you again another time. That will be next month for another development series to discuss another topical development issue. That is what we do at WEP Development Series, to discuss topical development issues, analyze them, and profile answers or solutions so that people will be sensitized and be able to take informed decisions that will develop our societies forward. So until we meet again, have a wonderful day. And once again, thank you for being part of this meeting. I remain your moderator, John Baki, the Deputy Executive Director of Women Environmental Program. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye-bye.